Hey guys, it's Stephanie, and I'm here to talk about the books that I read in July. I know this is probably the first wrap up I've done all year, and I just didn't want to commit to doing any more wrap ups because I've just had a lot of stuff going on in my life where I didn't have a set filming schedule and I just couldn't promise to do that. So I just kind of did away with them for a while. This is no promise that I'm going to keep doing wrap ups, but it just happened to work out this month where I could film a full wrap up about what I read this month, which is something I kind of miss doing. But anyway, I read 12 books this month. I'm going to start with the books I liked least and work my way up. So the first book I want to talk about was a 2.5-star read for me, so I didn't read anything like awful this month. This is just books that I was kind of disappointed in. And the first one was I Feel Bad About My Neck and Other Thoughts About Being a Woman by Nora Ephron. And I was really sad to rate this one this low. This was my first book that I read by Nora Ephron, and I think I was expecting more on her work. And this is more essays on growing older and basically what that means. And she's talking about like saggy skin on your neck, which is something you just don't think about when you're young, and you're confronted with that every day when you're older. And I wanted to like this. I love Nora Ephron's movies, and I think this was just not a great place to start with her. And there were a few reasons I really wanted to like this book. One is that she passed away not that long ago, and two is that I do enjoy her films. But this was more essays on what she's noticed as she's growing older, especially concerning her physical body or what she had to do to keep it up and maintain it. You know, there were essays on her hair drying appointments and her weekly manicures and her struggles to find a handbag. On one hand, it just wasn't what I wanted from a memoir of hers, which it was unfair because I hadn't read any of her other memoirs. So I started with this one and just was a little disappointed. So I'm going to try to look for another one where maybe she gets maybe a little more personal about her life or about her work. So if you have any recommendations for maybe a better Nora Ephron memoir, I would be very open to it. The next book I read was a new release called 6 Stories by Matt Wesolowski. I read this as an ebook. This is a thriller with a little bit of a gimmick, and I have gone on the record that I am totally fine with gimmicks. Like, horror and thriller is very conducive to like gimmicky type stories. Here's my issue. Your story can't rest on the gimmick. Like, your story needs to be better than the gimmick. So the gimmick with this story is that it's told in a podcast format. It's very much like Serial. In fact, they reference Serial quite a bit in that it's like an unsolved mystery with like 6 episodes where the host interviews like 6 people who were connected to the victim of this unsolved murder in England. Where this boy's body was found in the woods. He was with like a wilderness youth group that was camping in the area. I found the mystery at first a little intriguing because it was a boy who had a bit of a criminal record and a bit of a reputation, so it was really hard to get public sympathy. You know, it wasn't like a blonde girl. After that, though, I had a really hard time really caring about the story or really caring about any of these people. I don't know why. It just felt like there was a distance. So I did enjoy the kind of uniqueness of the story for whatever that's worth, but I didn't care enough about the story as I went through, and I feel like that's pretty bad with a thriller. I need to have something propelling me forward. I need to feel a connection to the story. I need to care about these characters and what they have to contribute to this mystery, and I just didn't with this. So I ended up giving that like 2.75 stars. My next book was a solid 3-star read. This was Miller's Valley by Anna Quindlen. I wanted so much more from this story. The thing with small town stories is like there's a take on it. Like, either the small town is really charming and it's really cute that everyone's friends and everyone knows your name, or it's like suffocating and you feel like the people's need to like get out of there. The problem with Miller's Valley, I feel like, is that it was neither, and the main character is pretty just bland and boring. She's just like a good girl who like goes through stuff, and people around her go through stuff, and I just really felt like that's what the story was. And then we spend a large chunk of the time with her as a child, a large chunk of the time with her as a teenager, and then just this very sudden time jump where we spend like 2 chapters with her, just like very few chapters with her as an adult. And I wanted a little more of that. I wanted a little more of her as an adult. This is a pretty unpopular opinion because this is a book that a lot of people really seem to like, but I don't know. I didn't love it. The same with the other two. I just really couldn't connect to it. I didn't connect with it at all, and that's fine. The next book I listened to, I was just in an audiobook slump. I just couldn't find books that I really connected with at all. So I have found that listening to something contemporary that's really easy to get to, that's very like plot driven, you know, very just easy to read and easy to get lost in a story is the way to go. So I listened to Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, and it was definitely that. It was just a story that I could get lost in. And you know what BookTube doesn't need is another person's opinion on a Rainbow Rowell book. Like, it was good. It did the trick. I enjoyed it. I didn't love like the fan fiction parts. I just found them boring. So the next time I'm in a slump, I'm probably not going to pick up Carry On. The next book I'm going to talk about is House of Names by Colm Tobin. And this is a retelling of the story of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. So we follow characters that are mentioned in the Iliad. When Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter, he told her that she was going to get married and she came in her wedding dress, but it was a trick. She became, you know, this sacrifice to the gods. So the story starts when Iphigenia is getting sacrificed, and how Clytemnestra, like as a mother, is seeing this happen and how she has to react. I think in the original story, she is kind of seen as like a power-hungry woman, where I think in this retelling, she is more of a vengeful mother. Like, she is making her husband pay for what he did to her and what he did to their daughter, and that's why she murders him. So it was a little different. We also get perspectives from their children, Electra and Orestes. I won't spoil the story for you if you don't know it, but I found those point of views a little less interesting. Orestes, of course, was interesting because he, you know, later becomes like the main character, but Electra's chapters I just could not care less about. But it was pretty solid. I'm in like this weird Greek mythology retelling mood. But yeah, the first half of the book is definitely stronger than the second half. The next book I read was Dress Your Family in Corduroy and Denim by David Sedaris. I had only read one David Sedaris book prior to this, and that was Naked. And like, I only liked half of the essays in that book because I tend to like the ones more about his family and his upbringing. And then Naked had a lot of stories about him being in college, and he was just kind of a D-bag, so I just couldn't deal with him. But I really did enjoy this one. It had a lot of family stories, and it had some stories of him, you know, as an adult in Paris and none of the D-bag college years. And I listened to this as an audiobook. It was awesome because David Sedaris narrated it, and he just has this like dry sense of humor. I just love the way he talks about things. He could be telling the most boring story, but just the way he tells it, I am just gonna listen to everything he has to say. So, you know, some stories were better than others, but it was still really enjoyable, and I'm really glad I listened to it. I gave it 3.5 stars. The next book I read was The Son by Phillip Meyer. This follows 3 generations of a family in Texas, and this has been made into an adaptation on AMC starring Pierce Brosnan. I haven't seen it yet because I don't have cable, but I am hoping if it ever gets onto Netflix, I will definitely watch it because it was a really interesting story. You guys know I'm a sucker for family sagas. So it follows 3 generations. So the first generation is Eli, and his story is very interesting. He gets kidnapped by a Comanche tribe, and they raise him, and, you know, he kind of goes back to civilization and becomes this, you know, wealthy like land baron. So his story was really interesting. The second generation is his son, who is just completely different from his father. He is a lot more empathetic. And his father kind of grew up and has this like, if you want it, take it, like that's the way you gotta be. He's very ruthless. And his son, like I said, is a little more empathetic, you know, is a little more cognizant of like the repercussions of these just brash actions and like taking what you want and like where that leaves people. So they butt heads a lot, and I felt like that was the strongest part of the story, was the contrast between the first and second generations. The third generation brought it closer to present day. Eli's great granddaughter, and I just really didn't like her story. I thought hers was kind of boring, very like focused on like relationship issues and like growing up and just drama that I really didn't care about. It didn't have the intensity of the first 2 generations, so I just didn't love her chapters. Overall, it was a really good story, and I really enjoyed reading it. I will definitely watch the adaptation. But yeah, I would say the weakest part was that last point of view. But other than that, it was a really solid read. And the next book I finally finished, guys, like finally, was Summer of Night by Dan Simmons. I spent like my whole summer reading this book, This book is very similar to Stephen King's It because it follows a small town. In this book, it's in Illinois. So it's an Illinois small town where, a group of kind of outcast boys have to band together to protect the town from a kind of supernatural evil. So it was really interesting. Dan Simmons is a really solid writer. It's very good horror writing. You do feel like the dread when you're reading it and you want to know what happens next. Also pretty ballsy because there's a character that dies that I was like, whoa, I did not think you would do that. It didn't quite have the depth of it, which at like 500 pages, it's like half the size of it. And I still felt like it was a little too long. Maybe I shouldn't say that too soon because I did buy The Terror by Dan Simmons, which is like way bigger than this. So I think I just need like a break from big books because I read 2 big books this month. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I definitely want to read more Dan Simmons. I do like the way he writes. So I gave this a solid 4 stars. The next gigantic book that I finished, I did as a buddy read with Olive over at ABookOlive, and we finished A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mistry. This takes place in India in the 70s during a national emergency that the Prime Minister has called, and it follows 4 characters in an apartment. We kind of see how all of these personalities end up working together. I think the issue we ended up having with it was that it kind of did seem like it was just these characters going through horrible things just over and over again. It was just like, if I could map it, it's like this, like they're all happy, something terrible happens, but they find happiness again and something terrible happens. And I felt like that was just what happened in the book. There's a lot of books like that. A lot of people really enjoy books like that. It reminded me of Wally Lamb's She's Come Undone, which I really didn't love because it kind of seemed to have that pattern. But even with that, it was a good read. These were characters that I did feel connected to. I did feel like it had strong writing. And, it was a long book, but it was very fast, very plot oriented. They weren't 2 pages wasted on describing a sunset to me, which I'm sorry, is something I don't love in books. So please do not recommend books to me where there's like chapters describing like leaves on a tree, because I don't love that. And this book didn't have that, which was great. So for being a big book, it was, accessible and easy reading, which I really did appreciate. I really did feel like I learned something. I just wish maybe it didn't have that kind of a setup. I did give it 4 stars. Okay, the next book I read was The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor. I went book shopping with Olive, and I actually picked this up when I went shopping with her. And I was really excited because Gloria Naylor, as I'm reading like the kind of books that she's written, they just kind of all seem up my alley. And this is, a novel kind of written in that short story form. So I was really excited to read this. So the stories are told from the perspective of 7 women who live in this building off Brewster Place. They all have their own different heartbreak and the different things that they bring to Brewster Place, and they all are kind of background characters in each other's stories. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed getting the different perspective of all these women. They were all so different. As I was looking through, I did see that this was made into a mini series like way back when. As I looked at the other books she was written, I saw that she also has The Men of Brewster Place, which I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that it's about 7 men that also live in this building called Brewster Place. And I do have Mama Day on my Kindle that I plan on getting to because it sounds amazing. I think this was Gloria Naylor's first novel, and I was pretty impressed with it. Some of the chapters in the stories, were a little predictable. When certain elements are introduced, you kind of know how the story is going to end. I don't feel like that was a bad thing, though, and I really ended up enjoying it, and I do want to read more Gloria Naylor, so this is 4 stars. So another buddy read that I did this month, I read All of Kitteridge with Liz Schubert, and this is another story kind of told in these like vignettes, kind of short stories. It's like 13 chapters. It's about this woman named Olive Kitteridge who lives in the fictional town of Crosby, Maine, which is like a beach town up north, and it's a little bit of a small town. Some of the chapters, follow Olive around. She is the main character of the story. We see her interact with other people. In other stories, we follow different people around, and she is a background character. But we still get, even when she is a background character, we get insight into who she is. A lot of people aren't big fans of Olive. When I've seen, as I was looking through reviews on Goodreads, she is a little curmudgeonly. She's a little bit of a prickly character. I really liked her. I really enjoyed her. She was just very blunt and honest, and she was a little cranky. but I was okay with that. I was just interested in hearing how she reacted to things. You know, it was a portrait of this woman from all these angles, and some of those angles are very unforgiving, and I really enjoyed this book. I might look into reading some more Elizabeth Strout. I am planning on watching the miniseries adaptation of this later this week, and I'm looking forward to it. So this was 4.5 stars. The last book I read this month, my favorite, was Dave Cullen's Columbine. This was a 5-star read for me. Dave Cullen was a journalist who was covering Columbine, and in this book he spends a lot of time talking about the misconceptions that came out when people were first reporting on it and all the things that people got wrong, so he's including himself in that. This was just so in depth. I didn't know that I had so many misconceptions about what happened there. I just felt like he did a really good balance of, you know, paying tribute to the victims and also kind of going into what happened to the killers, like who were these people, you know, what was their upbringing, and any kind of questions you could have about this. So I listened to this as an audiobook, and then my husband listened to this as an audiobook, which we don't usually read the same books, but he also really enjoyed this, which is saying something because we're very different. So this is a book I definitely recommend. I don't usually read these kind of true crime books. I feel they try to sensationalize things, and I don't feel like they pay proper respect to the victims. And I don't know, something about it seems a little like voyeuristic, and I didn't get that feeling with this at all. So if you're like me and you're hesitant about things like that because of those things that I mentioned, I would pick this up. I would give this a chance. I thought it was really well done and really respectful. So this is my 5-star read for the month. So that is what I read this month. So what is the best book you read in July? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!